Alrighty, yo, what is going on, everybody? It's your boy, Mr. DDG94, and back with another reaction video. So we're gonna react to the Rise of UPN. Oh man, RIP to a GOAT right here, man, for real. RIP UPN, man. RIP, man. Come on, man. And I'm gonna miss everybody.
That's what he said. That's what he's supposed to go. She working on the plan to heaven. Find the Lord on 24/7 days. God is who we pray. Even though the devil's all up in my face, but he keeping me safe and give my place. Say thanks to the gas we race, but I check the face and jealous and against my soul. But girls, because there's no much of a good. Ooh, what can I do? It's all about the family, ain't how we do. Can I get a witness? Not in the foe. We live it our lives, so we turn our soul. Hey, hey. Follow me, rose stone. Weather is telling us time and come. So think of it to the people that's no there is. Ladies in the
To this day.
Family, exactly how many
To this day.
When you laughing, we're passing the way. Always got follows. If I never want me to walk out the car. Well, y'all know if I ever got up in them rollers, baby, I'm gone. Round to the count. But when I gotta die, gotta go bye-bye. All I look up to do was cry. Wanna kill my dog, yeah, man.
Miss my Uncle Charles, y'all. They took the greatest channel for niggas that ain't had no cable. One of the greatest channels for niggas that ain't had no cable got taken away from us, man. See you at the crossroads, you won't be lonely. So you won't be lonely. So you won't be lonely. So you won't be lonely. And I'm gonna miss everybody. 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 Come on, man. RIP to UPN, man. Let's get right into it, though.
In January of 2018, the Paramount Network came onto cable systems nationwide. Viacom, the owner of the channel, rebranded Spike, which they had broadcast since 2003, with the name of their largest property, their movie studio. However, this actually isn't the first time that the name Paramount and the word network have gone side by side. Far from it, actually. Paramount had their own network for years right around the turn of the century. This one, though, wasn't cable. During its tenure, you would have seen it among the big boys like CBS, NBC, ABC, and Fox. And this network was eager to become a direct competitor to these four. It was aiming to change the big four to the big five. A little more ambitious than a rebranded cable channel, right? However, despite their best efforts, this didn't happen, and this particular network is no longer on the airwaves. So how did a network with such big dreams and from such a big company fail to stick around? Join me as we find out and take a good look at the rise and fall of the United Paramount Network, UPN.
The GOAT! The GOAT! Oh man, the motherfucking GOAT right here, man! The motherfucking GOAT right here, man. What is we talking about? Come on, man. UPN. Come on, man. UPN. The station that used to run reruns of Martin and Fresh Prince. And used to have a stake in that 70s show. So that 70s show was getting played while it was still on the air, pumping out new episodes. But we could go back and watch the previous season, reruns of the previous season on here. Motherfucking Simpsons, Frasier. Oh, nigga, don't even get me started on WWE. WWE, nigga, SmackDown on Thursdays and Fridays. Oh, take me back. This was the good times, bro. This was the good times right here, ladies and gentlemen. You just had to be there. UPN, bro. UPN is fucking goated.
So let's talk about TV, alright? TV is old. The big three broadcast networks have been around practically since the medium began in the 1940s. NBC, ABC, and CBS are veterans, to say the least. An important distinction to make is that these are broadcast networks, as in stations that are transmitted over the air by local affiliates of that network, hence why these are often called over-the-air networks or terrestrial networks if you're outside the US. And for quite a while after the medium was started up, broadcast networks were the only way to watch live television. You had 3 networks and you chose one. That was the way Americans watched TV. But it didn't always seem that way though. Numerous networks stepped in and sought to be the quote-unquote 4th network. These were guys who thought that there was room for one more network to step in and offer some serious competition. In the early days, there actually were 4 networks, and the 4th one was called the Dumont Network. However, this wasn't a 4th network in the traditional sense. See, when television was just getting going, early affiliates didn't choose one station and stick with it. Today, most markets have clearly defined ABC, NBC, and CBS affiliates, but this hasn't always been the case. Affiliates often had primary affiliations and secondary affiliations, and this made sense being that there weren't as many affiliates in most markets. So if a station had a primary affiliation with ABC, that affiliate would air ABC's primetime lineup at more or less its standard time, but they would cherry-pick popular programs from their secondary affiliations to preempt whatever was being shown on ABC at the time. They could also air the primetime lineup for their secondary affiliate in a slightly different time slot just to fill up empty airtime. Sometimes multiple affiliates shared a secondary affiliation so that more of that network's programming could be collectively seen by the area. So say if you had 2 networks, one CBS affiliate and one NBC affiliate, they might both have a secondary ABC affiliation so that one shows 3 ABC shows and another shows 3 different ABC shows. You see 6 ABC shows and everyone's happy. Does that make sense? If it doesn't, don't feel bad, because television really was a mess at the time, and the Dumont network wasn't helping. With the technology still growing, there simply wasn't room for 4 players to squeeze in there, so something had to give. And ultimately, the Dumont network, which faced numerous struggles in trying to establish themselves and grow to the size of the other guys, faded away, leaving just 3 networks for a number of decades. But one of those networks, ABC, wasn't always sure to be a big player though, because in 1951 they were nearing bankruptcy. In fact, ABC was actually kind of an outsider, and for some markets, there were really only 2 stations, with ABC being the distant third. See, ABC got significantly less coverage nationwide than CBS or NBC. Now, meanwhile, on the complete other side of the aisle, Paramount was forced to part ways with its theater division, which would be named United Paramount Theaters. This new offshoot of Paramount, with money to burn and a wish to branch out, acquired ABC and gave it the financial boost it needed to steadily rise. Paramount can largely be credited for giving the country ABC. And with that, 3 networks became the industry standard: ABC, CBS, and NBC. These were the 3 networks, and you picked one. That's just the way it was. This isn't to say that other guys didn't try to be the 4th guy. In fact, Paramount actually had their own serious contender for a little bit. Paramount was a corporate partner of Dumont that had gained some control of the company and proceeded to sabotage it in attempts to chase its own television ambitions. The reason Dumont fell and Paramount's involvement with that is a whole different story, and a tragic one at that, but suffice it to say that Dumont faded and we got the Paramount Television Network as the result. It had considerably less success than the Dumont network, but it managed to last for 8 years between 1948 and 1956 before biting the dust, and it managed to produce a couple of decently popular shows, though it'd be a stretch to call any of them hits. Paramount, though they didn't have a network, proceeded to put their production studios to work producing programs for the networks that had managed to survive the early days, and they actually managed to crank out quite a few hits for both syndication and networks. Popular series include Mission Impossible, The Odd Couple, Happy Days, and The Brady Bunch, just to name a few. Paramount was doing exceptionally well with television, and many within the company felt that they had still yet to do so much. In many ways, Paramount was a great force that played a major role in shaping television up to this point. By 1978, with newer shows doing great, Paramount began to return to the idea of having their very own network. 4 years earlier, a man named Barry Diller had become the chief executive. Diller had previously worked as the VP of Development at ABC, and he's actually credited with pioneering the concept of the TV movie. He was a very television-oriented guy, and it was Diller who pushed and pushed for people within Paramount to believe that the company could occupy the coveted spot of the fourth network. The station he proposed would broadcast only on Saturdays, and it would screen an episode of Star Trek Phase 2, followed by a movie. Simple enough, but that left room to grow. The station would be called the Paramount Television Service. Everything was all set for an April 1978 launch. They had even gone so far as to create idents for the network. But then it got delayed due to issues with advertisers, and then, due to corporate fears that it would be too much of a money hog, the network was ultimately cancelled 6 months before the new proposed launch date. The Paramount Television Service never saw the light of day. But Barry Diller, however, Barry Diller was a determined man. He knew that there was room for a fourth network, but he learned that Paramount was not the place it was going to happen. So, after a bitter departure from Paramount, he moved to another company and, along with that company's Rupert Murdoch, started up a new television network that bore the name of another popular movie studio that had previously played a production role in television. In 1984, Diller was named chairman and CEO of Fox Incorporated. His intentions for Fox were well known throughout the industry. He wanted to start the fourth network. The Fox Broadcasting Company was born in 1986, and under Diller's lead, the Fox network slowly grew to become a serious force to be reckoned with after shows he greenlit, like Married with Children and The Simpsons, became smash successes. In 1994,
you forgot the other shows that really launched the network. We forgetting about Martin. We're forgetting about In Living Color, which was really a pioneer of Fox Network, if we being quite honest. Yes, my wife and kid, not my wife and kid, but Married with Kids is the staple. It is the staple. No show was fucking with them ratings at all, except The Simpsons, of course. The Simpsons came in and changed the landscape, but Martin and In Living Color, them shows was doing numbers, bro. So we can't. I don't like the fact that you leaving them shows out too. Them shows were just as important as. I just don't like when we leave them shows out, bro, because them shows are actually important.
Nationwide TV realignment took place, wherein Fox was pretty much officially, totally, almost irreversibly recognized as a new network, and their nationwide affiliation was greatly expanded. There was a fourth network now, and it was Fox. During this whole ordeal, Paramount was sitting back from the sidelines and continuing to produce more shows, but they certainly took notice. Paramount had never really lost hold of its wish to have the extra TV station, and they kept their eye out for an opening. Alright, press pause on Paramount for a second. We're going to go back a little bit and take a look at yet another important player here, Chris Craft Industries. If you've never heard that name, don't be surprised, because in their earlier years, Chris Craft was actually the largest manufacturer of small boats on the planet. However, as time went on, different parent companies gobbled them up and restructuring took place. The company began to focus more on broadcasting in addition to their manufacturing, and they founded the Broadcast Holding Company as a corporate subsidiary to help out with this new direction. They began to invest in 20th Century Fox, and they owned 19% of the company by 1980. They also bought up 19% of the company called United Television, and continued to buy more until 1983 hit, and with over 50% ownership, BHC was the parent company of United Television. United Television was a company they wanted primarily for the local affiliates that they owned in big markets. The next year, the company sold off their boat division, and the Chris Craft boats that exist today only have the name in common with the original company. The company owned and operated 8 local affiliates by 1993, all of them in big markets, including Los Angeles and New York, and this made them a big name in the TV business because all of these large markets made them the 6th largest broadcaster in the company, and they reached 20% of US households. So naturally, anyone looking to start up a new network would want Chris Craft as their corporate buddy. back over to Paramount, who is now looking to start up a new network of their own once again. Their main motive was to have a more tangible means to distribute their programming. See, the FCC had recently loosened its rules, and the changes allowed networks to own their programming, a practice not allowed previously. Since Paramount could now own the shows on its network, it seemed a great time to start one up. It meant that Paramount wasn't restricted to other networks or syndication. It could make its own shows for its own network. Well, if they had a network. So that's what they set out to make. Once Paramount went looking for partners in their new network venture in 1993, Chris Kraft was up to negotiate. The negotiations were largely kept out of the public eye as much as they could be, and info is limited, but Chris Kraft was definitely very involved. They weren't going to be merely a tunnel through which Paramount could spread their new network. They would be a key player in the network itself, and they would own the network outright. The agreement they reached by July 1994 was 120 pages, and it became known that the network would not be called simply the Paramount Network, as many had thought, but the United Paramount Network, with the United portion of that name coming off of United Television. All of this signaled that Chris Kraft would have a larger role than many originally thought. The proposed network would launch in January 1995 and initially reach over a quarter of US households. Of course, they would expand over time. This was all going on immediately after Paramount had been through more changes. Earlier in 1994, Viacom had merged with Paramount after a long battle with QVC over who would get the company. Interestingly, Barry Diller had moved to QVC by this point, and many believe that the move toward a TV network at Paramount was just one big jab at Diller, who was vicious in his pursuit for Paramount and had burned quite a few bridges on his way out of Paramount and over to Fox. Ultimately, Diller would not get his claws on Paramount, and new parent Viacom had approved the idea of a new television network during merger talks, but after the paperwork had gone through, Viacom began to feel a little bit less confident that a TV network would be anything more than a cash hog, and their approach became one of hesitance. Ultimately, though, they would go through with it in order to compete with Time Warner. Wait, what? Okay, it's hard to talk about UPN without talking about the WB, which is a similar fifth network concept that was taken on by Time Warner at the same time as Paramount tackled it. These two networks are certainly similar, but in order to keep this video kind of short, I'll be talking about the WB in a completely separate video. For the purposes of this video, I'll tell you only what you need to know about the WB as it pertains to the UPN.
Yeah.
And since Paramount did face the threat of another new network coming onto the scene at the same time they did, they made the call to go ahead and launch so that they wouldn't fall behind. Both networks, however, knew they were facing an uphill battle. It didn't help matters that cable had only continued to grow. The USA network in particular was very popular, and many considered it to be the spiritual fifth network, even if it was cable. UPN's strategy was effectively trying to emulate the success of Fox, and in doing so they'd follow Fox's model. The whole story of how Fox became the fourth network is a story for another day, but they did start small and proceed to produce more content as time ticked on and growth continued. And this is the most sensible way to go about starting up a new network. UPN would begin by broadcasting only 2 nights a week with 2 hours of original programming nightly. Paramount would flaunt their golden boy, Star Trek, with a TV series called Star Trek Voyager. Alongside that show would be 4 new original shows: Pigsty, Platypus Man, The Watcher, and Marker. I don't have time to delve into the specifics of every show in UPN's lineup, so just take these shows at face value. Suffice it to say that it wasn't particularly anything special. One newspaper described the initial lineup as reheated leftovers. Sitcoms, action series, dramas, it was all being played pretty safe. The network was being prepped to launch on Monday, January 16th, 1995. The very first broadcast would be the inaugural 2-hour episode of Star Trek Voyager. Now, when airtime arrived, the results were explosive. UPN, believe it or not, won the night. With a 14.2 rating and over 20 million viewers, more than the season premiere of the Roseanne revival, believe it.
Nigga, they were catering to geeks and nerds. Of course you gonna do numbers that night. You know how many geeks and nerds love Star Trek and Star Wars and all that shit?
They're not. The network placed first in ratings across the nation's major cities. In second was Fox, in third was CBS, and fourth was NBC. And for the first time ever, an established Big Three network, in this case ABC, placed 5th. It was unheard of. Even with the WB's launch earlier the same month, it didn't make anywhere near as much of a splash.
Damn.
So things were looking pretty good for UPN. Unfortunately, things really didn't get better. Star Trek, though still remaining popular, never was able to reach a rating anywhere near the 14.2 it received on its first night, often garnering a third of that. And as for those other 4 shows, they were nearly universally panned by critics. Many called the shows bland and unoriginal, or at best, watchable. Unsurprisingly, none attracted any real following. By just May of 1995, it was announced that UPN would drop all 4 of these shows from their fall lineup, leaving only Star Trek as a survivor. UPN did perform better than rival network WB, and the performance of UPN was actually better than what Fox had when it was so young. In fact, UPN, averaging a 4.5 rating, wasn't too much worse off than Fox, the last place network at this time, who averaged 7.7. The WB, meanwhile, managed a pathetic 1.8. UPN was off to a bumpy yet considerably strong start. Oh, and it was also around this time that ABC merged with Disney. Yeah, that was kind of a big deal. Once fall rolled around and it was time for the real television seasons to get going, UPN had purged their original lineup and tried to capitalize further on the only audience who was really tuning in, the Star Trek audience. 2 new hour-long science fiction shows were introduced, and an hour-long drama was added for balance, I guess. Interestingly missing were sitcoms. The WB had built its entire lineup around sitcoms, and UPN had its fair share of them in their original January lineup. UPN was aiming for a more distinct audience. Counter-programming was the concept. Show things unavailable elsewhere. UPN wanted desperately to be considered unique, in a manner similar to how Fox had established themselves as a younger, edgier network. Regardless, the season proceeded and new shows came, and just as quickly went. UPN still wasn't making waves, but they came to realize that there was a market, a much larger one, for which content wasn't being mass-produced for on the big 4 networks. UPN set their sights on African-American viewers. It really made sense considering that UPN was available primarily in large cities with diverse populations, and when it came to
Yep. UPN definitely targeted us. And that's why we still hold UPN very near and dear to our hearts, because that was the broke people version of UPN. If you didn't have cable in your house, that was the broke people version of BET. If you didn't have cable in your house and you couldn't watch BET, UPN was your BET.
Nielsen ratings, it was the large cities that really counted. Alright, so UPN decided to take the idea of counter-programming and really run with it, and with a market so large and untapped like African-American viewers, especially after the predominantly black sitcoms of the 1980s wore thin with viewers, UPN had their work cut out for them if they wanted that audience. And so when UPN was making the calls on what shows to greenlight, they leaned heavily towards shows with black casts. It was also around this time, May of 1996, that UPN began broadcasting on Wednesdays in addition to the Mondays and Tuesdays they had broadcast on since their beginning. For their new target audience, they assembled an arsenal of new shows, 6 of them as a matter of fact.
Oh man, Homeboys to Outer Space is hot garbage. I don't even know who even came up with that idea. Whoever came up with that idea, you need to go to hell. Whoever came up with Homeboys in Outer Space, whoever came up with this, bro. Let me see if I can move. Whoever came up with Homeboys in Space, right? If you came up with this, you need to go to hell. This shit was hot fucking garbage, and it was so fucking... Bro, whoever made this, bro, go to fucking hell. I beg of you, please, go to hell. Okay. I just had to get that out my system. Cause I saw the episodes on UPN. I never thought it was real. I thought this shit was a joke. Turns out this shit was real. Homeboys in Space was real, bro. Whoever made that shit, go to hell. Like, for real, go to hell with gasoline draws on. Now let me break it down for you. Moesha was the top show. Malcolm and Eddie was a top show as well. In the House was a good show. This show, it could have went somewhere for some odd reason. They didn't give it a chance to really go through. This show right here was about black people in a light that was different, bro. It was about successful black people, bro. Successful. Not like Fresh Prince successful, but successful like the whole fucking family was lawyers. Every one of them was a successful lawyer. Look at that. They got Terrence Howard, Robert Givens, R.I.P. to Uncle Phil, or James Avery. You got homeboy from Joanna Man. I forget his name. Bro, they had an all-star lineup right here, but they never let the show go on, bro. Like I said, and then I don't know nothing about this show right here. All I know is this show, they should have gave this show another chance. Malcolm and Eddie was doing their thing. In the House was cool. And Moesha was the star show. Even though I never watched Moesha, I never really watched Moesha like that because I'm not into girl shows. But I know Moesha was the top show because my mom was watching that shit religiously back then when I was a kid.
All of them comedies, all with majority black casts. Worth noting is a show called In the House, an LL Cool J show that NBC had aired for 2 seasons before giving it the axe. That's really only notable because of the fact that it was a former NBC show. See, Paramount loved making television shows, however there's only so much that one company can put out, and they were forced to find other people to make their shows for them. But believe it or not, there weren't many people waving their shows in front of UPN's face begging for them to be picked up. Shows went to UPN when other networks had canceled them or rejected them outright. UPN was notoriously a network for shows that needed a plan B. It was a reputation they would struggle to shake. The other notable show is Moesha. See, the creator of Moesha, Ralph Farquhar, was coming hot off another show, South Central, that had aired on Fox for 1 season before the network canceled it. The show was loved by critics because despite technically falling into the comedy genre, it got very real at times, giving a dark edge that displayed the true hardships of urban life. That didn't stop Fox from axing it after just 10 episodes. In fact, Fox canceled all of the shows that aired on South Central's night, citing low ratings. All of the shows that got the boot, though, did have black casts, which didn't make Fox any friends in the racial activism world. Jesse Jackson was especially not a fan and called for a boycott of the network. Regardless, the creator of the show created Moesha, and after CBS declined to pick it up, UPN gave it the go-ahead. The show was not only popular at an average of about 3.5 million viewers an episode, but it was praised. Though the show was a more traditional sitcom compared to South Central, the recurring theme of biting issues being present remained. By September, the results were in. If nothing else, UPN was beating out the WB, and considerably at that. They were also nearing, and in some cases getting ahead of, Fox, especially in the comedy department, which by this point, UPN had embraced with very open arms. UPN was posting that black viewers made up 52% more of their audience than white viewers, and that might sound like a lot, but it was actually third highest behind Fox at 105, and the WB at the astronomical number of, and you're not gonna believe this, 586%. In overall viewership, though, UPN had the edge over the WB. In December of 1996, a big announcement was made. Viacom was buying half of UPN. Chris Kraft had owned the station in whole up to this point, but with this move, Viacom and Chris Kraft would be equal partners in ownership of the network. This was big, and it signaled that change was on the horizon for the network approaching its 2nd birthday. These changes certainly didn't come right off the bat, of course. The network for the early part of 1997 didn't do much more than just trudge along. A new show, The Sentinel, however, came in as a mid-season replacement and saw decent success. Of course, as is tradition, TV shows come and TV shows go, and there are plenty that simply for time constraints I'll be ignoring. Perhaps the biggest change to come was the expansion to Thursdays after the 96-97 season ended. At 4 nights a week, they were slowly growing to become a larger network. However, Thursday was a strange day to add, considering NBC's famous, or infamous in the network business at the time, must-see TV, a Thursday night lineup packed to the brim with smash hits like Friends, Seinfeld, and ER.
Fuck
the
Friends.
Other broadcast networks didn't really even try to win over the NBC audience on Thursdays, and it was a graveyard slot for networks other than NBC for many years. The only programming in this new night, though, would be a sci-fi movie. For 1997, their new lineup included Clueless, a 2-season ABC show that UPN nabbed after ABC decided they had had enough, along with some new shows from God knows where, none of which lasted for more than a season. But they were still clinging to Star Trek Voyager, though, and Moesha stuck around. That's all that mattered. By this point, both UPN and the WB were well known both in the industry and in the homes. Many within the industry had dubbed them the mini-networks, or the quasi-networks, or the wannabe fifth networks. In any list of the broadcast networks, there would always be a break right after the name Fox was listed to introduce the would-be brothers of the Big Four in UPN and the WB. By this point, it had become clear that even though these networks had launched with plans to be radically different from the other networks, their execution had clearly been more of the same, with the exception, of course, of their performance. The proper broadcast networks weren't doing particularly well, so the smaller networks were having inherent troubles getting off the ground. There was the occasion where one of the larger networks would absolutely tank and one of these networks would come in fourth, but it was a rarity. The two networks had lost so much money that merger talks actually started up between the two. These were a non-starter though because Chris Kraft wanted absolutely no part of it because of the adjustments they'd have to make to their stations. The chief executive of the WB also flatly stated, "I don't think there will be a merger. I think one of us is going away." Even still, many believe that the market hadn't adjusted and that there just wouldn't be room for an extra network, let alone two of them. If only one of them could survive, experts projected that it'd be the WB, citing a stronger lineup of shows and a better overall strategy. This speculation came at the same time that yet another new network was in the works. A man named Lowell Paxson, who is credited with inventing the infomercial, was very interested in having a network of his own, and he believed that he could really do it. He wanted to take a new strategy entirely. He already owned a vast arsenal of stations, many of which he used as 24-hour infomercials. But with his new network, the plan was to seek not to pick up shows, but companies. His idea was to sell 30 minutes of programming to a company like Universal, who could slot whatever show they wanted to without approval from the network itself, but would also be responsible for advertising. They could at any point change the show in their slot and would have full freedom. Another 30-minute slot could go to Sony, and another to a smaller company, perhaps even a more distribution-oriented one. It was a unique strategy to say the least. Ultimately, though, the strategy
he slid through. He was coming through the clutch.
PAX TV came onto the airwaves. PAX would never see the level of success of UPN or the WB, but ironically, it is the only one of the three that is still alive today. Only now it goes by the name Ion. Okay, sorry, back to UPN. Now, I've largely ignored the growth of both of these networks, as in the gaining of affiliates and expansion into new markets and resultantly new households. But as of July 1997, UPN reached 75% while the WB reached 69%. However, a shakeup took place that month, which was a significant blow to UPN. The WB had work to do with station-owning giant Sinclair to switch 5 UPN stations to the WB, and these 5 were located in big markets: Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Cincinnati, San Antonio, and Oklahoma City. This brought both networks to 72% of the nation, which many agreed would bring the race down to who had the better programming. UPN was not too happy about this, and they actually proceeded to sue Sinclair, who still owned 5 other UPN stations. Supposedly, Sinclair didn't properly disclose that they were making the deal with the WB, but most people just didn't buy it. It was also around this time that a former Disney executive, Dean Valentine, took at the helm of UPN and promised to shift the programming focus away from what he called narrow groups of viewers, or really African Americans. A phrase he liked to use was, "I believe you have to broadcast, not narrowcast." Huh, clever. One of these new programs was the next logical step in the emulation of Fox's success: an adult cartoon. After all, Fox had struck gold with The Simpsons, which was an absolute juggernaut, and that's exactly what UPN hoped they were developing in 1998. In this cartoon, Dilbert. This went right along with the other shows that were announced for the 98-99 season. These included comedies like Deresta and Guys Like Us, the latter being a show that Dan Schneider would go on to copy the premise of not once, but twice, as well as more dramas including Mercy Point, 7 Days, and Legacy. Of those 5, only 7 Days would move beyond its first season. Also, there is one more series: The Secret Diary of Desmond Pfeiffer. Yes, that's actually how you pronounce it. Not too many people were happy about what they thought would be a very lighthearted take on a dark part of American history. Because this wasn't a drama, oh no, it was a comedy, a sitcom no less. A sitcom centered around the same political satire of the modern day applied to a president of old. The whole irony of this show is that it parodied the Clinton White House in the Lincoln White House. See, Bill Clinton had changed the landscape of political commentary and satire with his scandals, so this wasn't anything surprising. But even with such a broad concept with so many poignant possibilities, wouldn't you expect more from the first episode aired than Lincoln engages in telegraph sex with a woman he's never seen? Clearly it was trying to find an audience relatively similar to that of South Park, which was new and hot. Activists, misguided or not, were still not amused with anything tied to slavery being trivialized, and protests ensued. In response, the pilot episode was not aired by UPN, with the second episode being substituted, and the show did go on as scheduled. And it was panned. Not necessarily because it was satirizing slavery, but because it was satirizing the whole time period very, very poorly. It treated the subject matter with very little.
So UPN was on that bullshit back in the 90s. So they had Moesha, they had all these black shows, and then they fucked around and did some stupid shit. See, this is what happens when white people try to expand to a wider audience while still trying to keep their same audience. No, work with what got you here, because white people love black shows too, you stupid ignorant fucks. Why the fuck would y'all go down this route? See, I didn't know about this shit because I was young back then. I was watching Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network and shit like that. I wasn't watching UPN like that. I didn't get into UPN until I got into wrestling. I didn't get into wrestling until I was like 3 years old. So I was like 97, 98. I was in wrestling around that time. And that's when wrestling was, That's that's when I got into wrestling. Then I started watching UPN and shit.
Little taste or cleverness. Even so, UPN advertised the show with the slogan, "The critics hate it, you'll love it." But even with the controversy this show stirred before it aired, the show really suffered to find any audience. UPN quit airing the show after only 4 episodes, which left 5 episodes, including the pilot, unaired. Good thing Star Trek Voyager and Moesha stuck around though. UPN also made a strange decision when they decided to orient the Monday night lineup, which went head-to-head with ABC's signature Monday Night Football, towards men. They insisted that only 12 to 15% of male viewers tuned into the game, but the number really resembled 34%. UPN was the second most male-favored TV channel in the US, second only to Fox Kids. Roughly 63% of UPN's viewers were male, so when a chunk of your audience that large is watching something else, it's no wonder that the new shows that went on Monday nights all tanked. On the other side of the aisle, the 90s was a merger-filled decade, and though ABC had Disney and Fox was attached to the movie studio of the same name, CBS and NBC, the latter of which had General Electric, who wanted out of television, and the former had Westinghouse, who had given everything they had to CBS and ultimately renamed themselves to the CBS Corporation, were both constantly facing rumors that they were soon to merge with a big company. One of the prime suspects was Viacom, who staunchly denied interest because of financial setbacks they were still ironing out from their acquisition of Paramount years earlier. Time Warner was also suspected, along with Barry Diller's USA Network company. Both Viacom and Time Warner already had TV networks, of course, but they couldn't deny the advantages of owning one of the big boys instead of one of the little guys. Nothing was coming out of these rumors, though. At least, not yet. UPN's situation had gotten worse. The WB had grown by 20% over the past year, largely thanks to their successful focus on teenagers and young adults. With shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Dawson's Creek, they consistently roped in a very young audience, and that made advertisers willing to...
Yeah, they had them shows. WB did have them shows. I don't want to wait for our lives to be over.
To cough up like Fox had done before them, they targeted young viewers.
I forgot WB did have these shows.
UPN had aimed at a broader audience, one not
They had Smallville too.
Damn. The Big Three, who weren't called big for nothing, already had that audience. An audience UPN argued that they just needed good shows, something that, with a few exceptions, they were struggling to attain. Industry experts argued that UPN's approach would never work without a strong arsenal of shows or a more narrow target for whom content was scarcer. The problem was that no such demographic existed anymore, largely thanks to cable. They still had programming for African Americans, but it wasn't providing the results UPN had hoped for, so they looked to branch out. And if the duds of seasons past were any indication, the former would not happen anytime soon. The head of UPN himself acknowledged that UPN had become synonymous with bad programming. Whatever the solution to this problem was, UPN needed to figure it out fast, because over the course of 1 year they had lost 40% of their audience and nearly $200 million. In fact, the UPN show received some of the lowest ratings in Nielsen history, getting fewer than 900,000 viewers to tune into new episodes. UPN's future was bleak, so much so that some shows' contracts had a clause stating that if UPN went bust in fewer than 4 years, which is generally the amount of time needed for a show to reach syndication-ready status, UPN would be forced to pay the production company's deficits. Many believe the fate of UPN was riding on whether or not one show was successful. That show? The aforementioned Dilbert. Dilbert was announced earlier on, but didn't actually premiere until January of 1999, and when it did, it showed that UPN's life wasn't over yet. Posting a higher rating than both NBC's and Fox's offerings in the Monday 8 o'clock time slot, Dilbert looked as though it could bring the network back from the brink of death. UPN's other shows, primarily Star Trek Voyager and to a lesser extent Moesha, were enough to post impressive numbers during sweep season. Not all shows performed well though, and Legacy placed dead last for any show in that sweep season. Other than Dilbert, Star Trek, and Moesha, UPN had no other hit shows. So even though the network wasn't on life support anymore, it was still in the ICU, so to speak. By April, UPN was airing another animated show, one you might be familiar with, Home Movies. Now, if you're
it's my shit.
Remember it airing on UPN, and you'd be remembering correctly. UPN aired 5 episodes, none of which performed well, and then gave the series the axe. Cartoon Network, however, saw potential and
picked it up.
Home Movies was the inaugural program of their new Adult Swim block, which launched later the next year. Home Movies received 3 more seasons and lasted until 2000.
That was my shit.
UPN, it was May of 1999, time to unveil the fall lineup. By far the biggest adjustment was the announcement that UPN would be dedicating its Thursday night lineup to its newly acquired WWF SmackDown.
Yes, sir! Yes, sir!
Basketball, it decided to break into the realm of wrestling.
Yes, sir! You already know.
That's what I'm talking about! That's why he's MVP! That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
You already know, my boy! You already know! already know. When WWF SmackDown was on, if you smell what the Rock is cooking, bruh, when this came on, and they had the fire ass matches back there, bruh. Jeff Hardy jumping off ladders on the tables, motherfucking Rock and Stone Cold beating the shit out of each other. Then Triple H would get involved, and then they just start beating up Triple H. Hey, these times were golden, bruh. This was still in the Attitude Era too, by the way. They made video games on, bro. This was golden. This is when UPN came UPN, nigga. This is when UPN became UPN, my nigga. When they added SmackDown, bro. When they added SmackDown, bro, it was not, bro. You couldn't say shit, bro. UPN was him. UPN became him, bro. All they needed was that WWF SmackDown, nigga, and that changed the game. Oh my god, bro. Y'all don't understand, bro. When UPN picked up SmackDown, it was raps. UPN was goated at that point. There was no other channel to fuck with, bro. Unless you was a football fan or a basketball fan, you would probably go with Fox and ABC. You probably go with Fox and ABC and NBC and CBS if you was a sports guy. But if you was a wrestling guy that liked to watch sitcoms, UPN was that other fucking channel. End the discussion. Not even up for debate, my nigga.
Wrestling had previously been cable-only fare, but UPN decided to bring it to a network. And on cable, it had seen popularity, and all of those viewers would migrate to UPN, the logic went. New comedies! The Grown-Ups, whose interracial cast sported Jaleel White. The Parkers, also known by the name of its
the Parkers! You're doing things in conjunction with the Parkers. Hey, I ain't gonna lie, that was my shit. That was my shit for a while. I never fucked with Moesha, but I like the Parkers though. The Parkers actually a good show. I like the Parkers.
And Shasta McNasty, a name I'd wish.
What? Bitch, what?
Boy, if you don't get...
I'd never have to say out loud was added too. There was also Secret Agent Man, a spy-fi drama. All of these shows, with the exception of the Parkers, had interracial casts, a clear side effect of Dean Valentine's efforts to broadcast. Ironically, the Parkers was also the only show to last beyond its first season. UPN appeared to be chasing the anti-WB audience. The WB had targeted teenage girls above all else with Buffy and Dawson's Creek. So especially upon picking up WWF audience. Teenage boys. UPN's reputation, though, remained as the network for black viewers. Though the WB briefly had a stint as the most predominantly black network on TV, UPN rebounded in the 99-2000 season, while the WB had isolated all of their black-oriented shows on, where else, Thursday night, which Mad TV did not find amusing.
Why do they put all the black shows on the same night? Like black folks are only home on Thursday.
The real Chris Rock, though, liked that UPN remained true to its audience. Even if it didn't have as many shows targeting them as it once did, it was still the network leader in racial diversity, and he even worked in this friendly jab at it in his HBO show.
UPN, the black man's friend. Now, even their award-winning news team has managed to keep its identity. Can we see a little bit of last night's UPN news telecast? Come on, can we see that?
The Dow closed after a day of mixed trading. The largest posted gain of 6 points. High technology stocks experienced a rally despite increasing uncertainty in that area, especially the internet-related companies, which remain volatile.
So with the new lineup of shows and revamped Thursday night, UPN continued to quietly churn along. But Viacom, on the other hand, was quite busy. They were having a lot of meetings with the CBS Corporation. The meetings themselves were kept out of the public eye, but the word of the meetings inevitably leaked to the press, and by September 3rd, 1999, rumors of what exactly was happening began to stir. Some projected that the two would trade parts of or even merge their station units. Now, buying and selling stations was very common in the TV industry, so it wouldn't be anything unusual, but it still had the potential to be a big deal, especially if the station units merged. Some of the more brazen rumors speculated that the two companies would merge altogether, and that would be huge. And that's why everyone lost it on September 7th, 1999, when the two companies announced that, yes, they would be merging into one giant mega corporation.
Damn.
So, what were the implications of this deal? And what did it mean for UPN? Well, I'll be answering those questions and several more in part 2.
Oh, damn.
Thank you so much for watching part 1 of this.
Alrighty, so that's gonna be it for this one, man. So we gonna find out more about UPN, and I do part 2 in the near future. I can't guarantee I'm gonna do it tomorrow because I got other plans. You know what I'm saying? I got other plans for shit that I want to upload to this channel. But we definitely gonna go back and do the rise and the fall of UPN, most definitely. This was great to see how it all started, because I never knew how it all started. I just knew when it was time, when UPN was that motherfucking channel, nigga. Once they got SmackDown, nigga, it was over, nigga. There was bro, they had SmackDown, they had Fox Kids. Well, in my city, our UPN had Fox Kids in the Fox Kids for Saturday mornings. So Power Rangers and all that, Spider-Man and all that shit, Pokemon, all that shit was on UPN, bro. Yeah, UPN had the Fox Kids and then the 4 Kids or the Fox Box, whatever the fuck you wanted, whatever it was called back then. I knew it was Fox Kids, then it changed to 4 Kids. You know, when they had Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Sonic X and One Piece and Yu-Gi-Oh! Yeah. UPN, my city, UPN had held all that down. Not Fox. Fox didn't hold it down. Fox in my city, they was playing fucking fishing and car dealerships. They was doing 1 hour infomercials for a car dealership in my city and a fishing show where motherfuckers would go out and start fishing and shit. Be a whole hour of niggas just fishing. Yeah, we caught a big old bass. Nigga, turn that shit off. Flip that shit back to UPN. Sonic! Your move. Yu-Gi-Oh! Y'all know. But anyways, I'm gonna leave it right there for right now. I'll see y'all in the next video. Till then, peace out.